The Federal Reserve has never been audited. Not fully, not once. It is owned by private member banks, and that single structural fact has determined the value of every dollar you have ever earned. Most people believe the U.S. Treasury controls monetary policy, that the government prints the money. That belief is not just wrong, it is the most expensive assumption in modern financial history. In 1913, a closed group of private bankers engineered a new monetary architecture from scratch. That architecture has never been dismantled, it has only expanded. Hold this question: when the dollar is printed, who collects? What follows is the structural answer, and why that answer was buried by design. The story begins November 1910. A private train departs Hoboken, New Jersey, after dark. The passengers traveled under first names only, no last names, no titles, no paper trail. Among them, Senator Nelson Aldrich and representatives of J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, and Kuhn, Loeb, the dominant capital houses of the era. Their destination was Jekyll Island, a private Georgia barrier island, access restricted to 50 of the wealthiest families in America. Over 9 days, they drafted what would become the Federal Reserve Act. Here is the detail that gets omitted in every standard account. The men designing the central bank were the same men whose institutions would profit most directly from its existence. The conflict of interest was not incidental. It was the blueprint. When the act passed in December 1913, it created 12 regional Federal Reserve banks. Each is technically owned by the private commercial banks operating within its district. Member banks hold stock in their regional Fed, stock that pays a guaranteed annual dividend. For decades, that dividend was fixed at 6%, regardless of recession, regardless of crisis, regardless of what happened to everyone else. That figure does not appear in standard monetary policy curricula. There is a reason for that. The Federal Reserve generates income primarily through interest on government securities it holds. After expenses and dividends to member banks, the surplus is remitted to the U.S. Treasury. In 2022, that remittance inverted. The Fed reported an operating loss exceeding $100 billion. Member banks collected their dividends regardless. Private gains, public losses. The structure held exactly as designed, but that is only the first layer. The second is where the mechanism becomes difficult to look away from. When the Federal Open Market Committee expands the money supply, it purchases assets, primarily treasury bonds. It purchases them with money created electronically, from nothing. No deposit, no collateral, no prior capital. The institution that controls the price of money creates money to purchase the debt of the government it nominally serves. Read that again. Now consider who sits between that mechanism and the open market. Primary dealers, a closed list of financial institutions with exclusive authorization to transact directly with the Federal Reserve. J.P. Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, Bank of America, roughly 20 institutions total. Every bond the Fed purchases passes through their hands first. They capture the spread. They collect the fees on every transaction, without exception. There is no competitive bid for this position. There is no application portal. The last index fund you purchased, the capital flow almost certainly moved through one of these institutions before it reached the market. The architecture is closed. Entry is by appointment only. The primary dealer system does not appear in the Federal Reserve Act. It was created administratively. No congressional vote, no public comment period. Maintained entirely by institutional consensus. Its full membership criteria have never been disclosed in any public document. That is not an oversight. That is a design feature. Most people stop at money creation. That is the wrong place to stop. The real leverage in this system is not what gets printed. It is what determines the price of everything. When the Federal Open Market Committee moves the federal funds rate, borrowing costs reprice across the entire global economy within hours. Mortgages, corporate debt, sovereign bonds, pension fund allocations, Every rate-sensitive instrument adjusts simultaneously. 12 individuals in a Washington conference room move more capital than any elected government on Earth. None were elected. All were appointed through processes heavily shaped by the banking sector they nominally regulate. This is not theoretical regulatory capture. It is structural. Federal Reserve Bank presidents are selected by boards of directors that include sitting private bank representatives. In 2011, a limited government accountability office audit surfaced $16 trillion in emergency loans authorized during the 2008 crisis, dispersed without congressional approval. Recipients included foreign banks, domestic primary dealers, and institutions whose executives held seats on Federal Reserve advisory boards at the time of disbursement. If that were the complete picture, it would already be without precedent. It is not complete. The Federal Reserve also holds supervisory authority over the largest bank holding companies in the United States. It creates money, distributes it through private banks, pays guaranteed dividends to those same banks, and simultaneously regulates them. That is not a conflict of interest. That is consolidated institutional authority with no external check. The Fed's balance sheet peaked at nearly $9 trillion in 2022, assets purchased with created money, held by an entity that is neither fully public nor fully private. That legal ambiguity is not accidental. It is load-bearing. The Federal Reserve has successfully argued in federal court that it is not subject to Freedom of Information Act requests. Accountability requires classification. Classification was never granted. The architecture was built to resist transparency. That resistance has never failed. Which brings the one question most analysts decline to ask out loud. When the system fails, who absorbs the loss? 2008 provided the answer. Losses were socialized through government bailouts. Gains had already been privatized through dividends, spreads, and fee structures accumulated over decades. The asymmetry is not a flaw. It is the founding principle. Every major crisis of the last century has expanded the Federal Reserve's balance sheet and institutional authority. None have reduced it. Each expansion transferred additional leverage to the institutions positioned closest to the money creation mechanism. You did not vote for this structure. You were born into it. And your savings, your mortgage, your retirement account operate entirely within boundaries it sets. The question planted at the opening of this analysis now has its answer. Who profits when the dollar is printed? The institutions that designed the printer and ensured no one else could operate it. The same capital houses, the same structural positions, reorganized across generations, never displaced, never diluted. That is not conspiracy. That is institutional capital preservation, operating across a century with near-perfect continuity. The Federal Reserve will outlast every administration that believes it controls monetary policy, because it was never designed to serve administrations. It was designed to preserve the architecture and the interest of the men who built it in that room on Jekyll Island. The dollar is not printed by your government. It is licensed to them, at interest, by the most durable private cartel in modern financial history.